and welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today on Tuesday, May 16th. It's also a great pleasure to be joined virtually by Susan Evans McClure, who has recently been named as the executive director of the Vermont Arts Council. She started work at the council just on May 8th, a couple of weeks ago. So, Susan, welcome to GNAT.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to have you down here. I should say before we get started, Susan Evans McClure came to the Vermont Arts Council after serving as the executive director at the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum in Vergennes. She was there since 2019. And she also serves as the chair of the board of directors at the Addison County Economic Development Corporation and as a trustee of the Carpenter Karst Library in Heinsberg. Well, between all those things, Susan, I imagine you're keeping fairly busy these days.
Yes, I do keep busy, and it's been a wonderful experience joining the Arts Council and really diving into the amazing work that the Arts Council does and connecting with the great artists and creative sector folks who work around the state.
Well, I thought we could start by having you tell us a little bit about the Arts Council, what it does, what its main mission is, for folks who may not be familiar with the organization.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Well, the Vermont Arts Council has been the state's primary provider of arts funding, advocacy, and general information about the value of the arts since 1965. So we have a long history and legacy to build on. And our work here is really based on the understanding that the arts transform people's lives, that they're vital to living in Vermont, that the arts connect people to each other, and they're an incredibly important part of our local and regional economy. And that the arts are really what make Vermont a great place to live and visit. So at the Vermont Arts Council, what we do is we invest in artists, we invest in the creative process, we work with teachers and educators and arts educators specifically to connect with early childhood education, K through 12 classrooms, and lifelong learners. We work with cultural organizations that connect to audiences across the state. And we work with everyone who engages in creativity, which I think are all Vermonters. We are a very creative state. I know I'm a little biased, but I do think Vermonters are the most creative people in the world. And we really believe that a thriving creative sector, so that's what we call the creative sector, is really every profession that touches the arts. And we believe that that creative sector is really core to sustainable economic development and thriving communities across our state.
Well, let's drill down into a little bit of that, because those are all very interesting points. I guess I just wondered, looking forward, and I realize you've only been at the desk for, what, a week or so at this point, but what are you seeing kind of lying ahead as the main sort of challenges and opportunities facing the Arts Council? I mean, we're coming out of the pandemic, I hope. That's what the government says anyway, that the emergency is over. But obviously, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about what the experience of the council was during the past 2 or 3 years as we were all struggling through that. Are we now entering a whole new phase that is going to enable the council to really expand its operations?
Yeah, well, let me start with COVID and the experience of COVID for the creative sector across the state. Of course, like everyone everywhere, the creative sector was incredibly impacted by COVID-19. And actually, since 2020, the Vermont Arts Council has given out about $12 million in grant funding to artists, creative organizations throughout the state. And that funding has been really incredibly important to sustaining our creative economy and our creative businesses and our artists working in the state. And one of the things that, COVID changed our world in so many ways. For a lot of the creative economy and creative sector, we're really based on interacting with the public, being part of something in the same communal space. So we've really had to rethink how we do our work, and people have been tremendously nimble in rethinking ways to connect with the public. The other piece of COVID, at least for me, that impacted my relationship with the creative sector. I was the director of a museum at the time, right? And I used to think of my job as a nonprofit leader. As I came up with exhibits, I worked with our team, I got to do really great work, but I didn't really think about the role that my organization played in the local economy. And the day that everything shut down in Vermont, honestly, I kind of froze and said, oh my God, my job is to keep 15 people employed. And it was at that moment that I realized the vital role that our creative sector plays in our economy is not just making the state a better place to live, which it does, but we also provide jobs. We also create opportunities for our economy to thrive. So that concept that the arts and creative sector is really tied to our local economy, I think that was one of the biggest changes during COVID, right? It was true before, but it kind of took COVID to shake us into realizing just how vital that was. And then the outcome of that is that we've seen some major investment from state and federal and private funders to value that role in our economy. And I'm hoping that in the future, and if I can read the tea leaves of the future of the creative sector, I know that that funding will continue from state and federal partners, and the Arts Council is going to continue to advocate for that funding and then continue to work with the sector to make sure that the funding is getting to the organizations and people who need it the most.
So your funding comes primarily, what, from the state and federal governments? Is that mostly where it comes from?
Yeah, so interestingly, the Vermont Arts Council is the only state art agency in the country that is a private nonprofit. In neighboring states and the other 49 states in the country, all of the state arts agencies are part of state government. We're a separate nonprofit, but we are made up of state funding, federal funding, and funding from private donors across the state.
Well, it's good to know that Vermont's a little different in more than one way. The term creative economy gets kind of bandied about a lot, and I imagine a lot of people, though, who aren't perhaps directly involved in it kind of scratch their heads sometimes and really kind of wonder, well, what is the creative economy? I mean, because it seems like there's more than 9% of the jobs in the state are tied to it, but that's not just artists, I'm assuming, right? That would include people who work in retail shops or involved in the industry in a wide variety of ways.
Yeah, so starting in 2015, the Vermont Arts Council has led a collaborative statewide effort really focused on research, advocacy, and networking to bring together the whole creative sector. And it's called the Vermont Creative Network. And the original goal of the network was to quantify the impact of the creative sector and advocate for its growth. And we've been doing that successfully since 2015 and continue to do that in the future. And in 2020, the Creative Network released an ambitious statewide study and the plan called Create VT Action Plan to really outline how we should be supporting the creative sector across the state. And in that plan, they outlined, I believe it's 7 areas that make up the creative economy. So it's the performing arts, literary arts, culture and heritage. I am looking at my list here if I don't forget. Culture and heritage, specialty foods, film and media, design, and visual art and crafts. So looking at all of those areas of the economy together, they're all united by the core of being creative and connecting the act of creating something new and putting it out there into the world together as a value. But if you actually just look at the arts and culture sector alone in 2021, just the arts and culture piece of that list I said, it contributed $1.1 billion to the Vermont economy. And actually that puts it third behind retail and construction. So if you're looking at the sectors that have the most economic impact, the arts and culture are right up there. And thinking of ourselves, and I say ourselves because that's kind of all I've ever worked in, but thinking of the sector on par with those other important economic drivers is really important to how we talk about ourselves, how we think about ourselves, how we advocate for our work on the state and federal levels. And I think it just really gives it the respect and validity that it deserves as a field.
So how does that compare with other states? If Vermont, if somewhere between 9 and 10% of jobs in Vermont are broadly defined as being part of the creative economy, is that an outlier kind of number in terms of being more or less than perhaps you might find in other states, or is it about the same everywhere?
Yeah, that's a great question. I believe it is more than in other places, but it is a big driver of the economy all throughout the country. There is a lot more information on our website and on the website of the Vermont Creative Network and also on the Americans for the Arts website. And we are not the only state that's thinking this way about the work. We're part of larger coalitions that are also working to kind of collect the data to make the case on this too, right? It's important also, as we're talking about the economic impact, as important as that is and as crucial as it is, it's not the only piece about why our work in the creative sector is important, right? The arts have an incredible ability to connect us to other people, to make our lives vibrant and vital, to help us express ourselves. I like to think of the what's often called in education kind of the windows and doors concept, right? So the arts can either, the windows and mirrors concept. So the arts can be a mirror to you. It can reflect your own experience back to you, or it can be a window into the life or lives of someone else. So there are a few things in our society that allow us to connect with people on such a deep level and in so many new ways. So I think that what is unique about the creative sector is both the economic impact, but also the human side of the creative efforts around our state. And when we bring those two together, it really elevates this incredible work that's happening across the state.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit also about the role the council may be playing in terms of art in schools. I imagine you probably work with a lot of elementary, middle school, high schools around the state to help supplement their own, art programs. Is that the case, or are they two separate areas altogether?
Yeah, it definitely is the case. We have an amazing staff working on arts education programs. And our work is really about getting and training teaching artists. So those are professional working artists who also are educators, and getting them into schools and into learning settings. So sometimes it's in a formal school setting, sometimes it's an out of school setting. So we run programs that connect artists with Head Start programs across the state, so early childhood education. And then we also have programs for teaching artists to be in the schools. We have a teaching artist roster. So if you are a school and you're looking to bring in a teaching artist to work with your students, you can go to our website, see our teaching artist roster, of who to contact. If you are a teaching artist, you can apply to us to be on that website, on the list of the teaching artist roster. And we also support training opportunities to make sure that the incredible teaching artists around the state have access to high quality educational training so that they're really prepared to be in school settings. But I think it's really vital, the role that arts education plays for students across the state, and actually all students in the country. Arts education is one of the few measurable areas where they're not only, it just helps in so many other things, right? So when you have an arts education experience, it might make you better at the specific art area that you're doing. You might become a better drawer or a better painter, a better artist, and that's great. But it also helps you in so many other ways. It develops your social and emotional learning skills. It helps with comprehension about kind of big ideas, which helps with reading comprehension. There's all sorts of transferable things that happen when students engage in arts education programs. But the most important thing is it's really fun, and it helps students stay engaged, and it helps students feel like they have a place in school and they can be themselves. And I think arts education is really core to all of our educational activities that we should be focused on in Vermont.
Yeah, absolutely, and all too frequently, I suppose, at least it seemed to be in years past, when school budgets would come up for discussion, negotiation, it would be the arts budget that would sometimes take the hit when it came to like lowering the budget.
I think I'm hoping that we're in a new phase where people really see the value of arts integration too, that the arts in schools should not just be something that happens kind of over on the side where you go to art. The arts in schools are part of an integrated learning experience for students. So they're really valuable to all of the work of learning, not just what happens when you're in art class. And I'm hoping that that shift, if not fully happened, will continue to be happening so that the arts can really be seen as core to an educational experience.
You know, another thing I wanted to ask you about was art in public spaces, in municipal settings. One doesn't always see art in a lot of places around downtowns or whatever, but I've often thought when one does encounter a piece of art, kind of in a public place, it's kind of interesting. Do you work with towns and zoning boards and whatnot to kind of get more art out into the public, or how does that whole process work?
Yeah, there's several ways. I mean, the first is that really core to revitalizing downtowns and increasing community engagement is public art. So we are strong advocates for public art in communities, and we work closely with our partners at other nonprofits and state agencies who are working on community revitalization and community development. And we're doing that through the arts. There's lots of ways that that can happen, but one of the way we focus on it is through the arts. We also run two programs on behalf of the state. One is called the Animating Infrastructure Program, and that program does just what you're saying. It encourages artists to work directly with towns and communities to be part of community development projects and make sure that public art is integrated into community projects. And that can take the form of, a mural on a railroad overpass. It can be a bus stop in your town that has an art installation in the bus stop. It can really be anything that an artist can create in partnership with their community. The other program that we do on behalf of the state is the Art in State Buildings program. And that program actually specifically puts artwork by Vermont artists in state buildings. Not just the state legislature has incredible artworks in it. It's curated by the state. It's great. But what this program does, the Art in State Buildings program, works with artists to get art in other state buildings. There are lots of state buildings across the state, and we are working to make sure that artists are enlivened in those spaces as well, and telling the story of what it means to be a Vermonter in the moment we're living in through the artwork that's displayed in the buildings. So absolutely, public arts, art in state buildings, those are really core to connecting artists with our towns, but also core to the work of revitalizing our downtown spaces and ensuring that the communities are engaged in their towns. And art and community engagement are so closely linked, and that's something we really focus on here at the Arts Council.
Yeah, well, it's I've often found it very striking when I've gone to places where there's large public art. Excuse me. I remember going over to Springfield at one point last year, and they had a gigantic mural of a stagecoach along the side of one building. I guess that used to be the stagecoach spot where it would land, but it was part of a whole process of downtown revitalization that the local community was working on. That was kind of a real centerpiece of what they were trying to get going. So it's pretty interesting to see. I wanted to kind of ask you, I guess maybe to loop back to something we were talking about a little bit earlier, the Vermont Creative Network. I noticed on your website you had a description of that, and I guess it's a broad collective of organizations, businesses, and individuals working to advance the state's creative sector. What is the story with the Creative Network, and is that a program that your organization's affiliated with?
Yeah, so the Vermont Creative Network has been around since 2015, and the Vermont Arts Council has led the efforts, but it's really a collaborative statewide effort, as you said, to bring together people from across different areas to really focus. Well, the Creative Network focuses on research, advocacy, and networking. So the idea is we want to research the work that we do so that we can quantify its impact. We advocate for the value that work has across our state, some of those economic impact numbers I mentioned earlier. And then networking, really. Vermont is a small state, but a very large place. And often the people who live here are far apart from each other and don't feel connected to each other. So while there is an incredibly vibrant creative sector here, often you might be an artist working on a dead-end road, not seeing a lot of other artists in your day-to-day life. So there's a lot of networking that's built into the Vermont Creative Network. It's right in the name, with the idea that there is value in bringing creative sector professionals together so that they can learn from each other, connect, maybe create new things, advocate for together, and really build a stronger creative economy and creative network for our whole state.
And I suppose that's the effort that's also involved with the Create Vermont. I guess that's a vision and action planning process. Is that the way to describe it?
Yeah. So the Vermont Creative Network worked on an ambitious statewide study to really document the scope and impact of the creative sector, and most importantly, to develop a roadmap and a vision for the future of Vermont's creative economy. So while it's really great to say, hey, the creative economy is important in Vermont, what we wanted to do with the Create VT Action Plan was say, where do we want to take it from here? How do we want to continue to grow? How do we want to continue to advocate for increased funding so that we as a sector can continue to give back to our local economies? Really, when you invest in the arts, you're investing in your local economy. And the Create VT Action Plan outlines how that's going to work. And really, it's a broad multi-systems approach to bringing together people who are already working in the sector, but also advocating for increased state and federal funding, and also working with sometimes unlikely partners, right, to bring arts to the table. The creative sector in Vermont is not immune to the hardships that are facing the rest of the state, right? Like we have the same challenges. There's not affordable housing. There is a lack of childcare. It's increasingly expensive to live here. Those things are impacting the creative sector as well. One of the things can be a little different about the creative sector is that in addition to struggling with these challenges, the creative sector can also have a hand in solving some of these problems. So if you want to build more housing, you have to have creative people to design the housing. If you want to have more childcare, you have to have opportunities for arts integrated learning for early childhood education. And on, that the arts can really be part of revitalizing our downtowns, as we talked about, that you need artists to do that in partnership with community. So we work hard here at the Vermont Arts Council to make sure that arts in the creative sector has a seat at the table in those discussions, and that also is tied to the Create VT Action Plan.
I was just wondering, a couple of years ago, before COVID, there seemed to be a big push to kind of bring more movie production to the state. There was a film board of some sort set up, but I haven't heard much about that recently, and that may be a COVID thing, but I guess, do you think that, the state is kind of putting enough resources into, bringing movie production, large scale? I mean, stuff you watch on Netflix or something to the state, and that would seem like be a great way to bring more investment to the state and across a broader area.
Yeah, so actually this topic has been on the minds of our legislators and our creative economy for the past few years too. And the legislature actually commissioned a study that was completed, I think in February, earlier this year, that really looked at what it would take to create, should we kind of ask the question, should we have a film board in Vermont? What would happen? What would it do? It's a really interesting study at how that might work in our small state. The reality of the situation is that there are other states who have devised kind of huge economic incentives and tax incentives for production companies to work there. And they've gone so far into it that a lot of other states just can't compete with them, right? But we, of course, want to encourage people to be filming in Vermont. Vermont as a brand is all over the world. And I think the story that's always used, right, is like a Hallmark Christmas movie set in Vermont that's filmed not in Vermont, maybe in upstate New York or something like that. And the results of that study went back to the legislature, were presented back to the legislature, and now they are considering the best way to move forward with it. There's great organizations in Vermont that are already pulling together resources. I think the key to that is, if you're a film company who wants to film in Vermont, we as a state want to make that as easy as possible for you. So we want you to know who to go to, who your local resources are, and focusing on that effort, I think, is a great first step for our state to make sure that we are compiling that information centrally. And there's organizations right now working on that. So, there might be future steps in that, working with the legislature to see what direction we want to go. We work closely with the Department of Tourism and Marketing also on all of this work. So yes, it is great, of course, to have people filming here and be investing their funds in the local economy. It's also great to support the artists who are already here and really focus on that. And, we can only, while we want to do everything, of course, right? You kind of have to prioritize where our focus is going to be. And yeah, we'll see what comes next with the concept of a film board and how we're going to work with the film and media sector. There already is a great film and media sector here in the state too, so we want to make sure that whatever the state wants to do moving forward is really being driven by the creatives who already work or who are already here. And I think that is my approach to really the whole Vermont Arts Council is, I have a strong background in the arts and nonprofit management, but my job is really to listen to the creative sector professionals. We are a service organization here at the Vermont Arts Council. So a lot of our job is being out in the field, asking people what they need, and then coming back and figuring out how we can get it and making sure it's what they really want. So it always works better instead of us saying, hey, we think we're going to do this thing, here we go. What we like to do is start a little more grassroots and be out in the field and make sure we're asking the creative sector really what they need and then helping to provide that.
We have about a minute or so left. I just wanted to ask you one question. You mentioned earlier Vermont has a certain brand that sort of lends itself well to creative sectors, for the creative economy. Why do you think that's so? I mean, what makes the state unique or different in that way?
Well, I will have to bring it to history, as part of my background is really in in history. I think Vermonters have always had to be creative throughout our history, either by choice or by necessity, right? We are a very rural area, and I think there is no more creative person in the world than someone who works on a farm and their tractor is broken in the middle of the field, but they need to figure out how to fix it. That is creativity at work, right? So it's the circumstances of where we live, how our state has changed over time. Sometimes we're creative because we want to be. It's great to do that. Sometimes we're creative because we have to be. We don't really have any other options. And I think it's just human nature also to be creative. Humans are creative beings, right? We want things to have aesthetic value. We want things to be pleasing and beautiful to look at, but also really functional. And that mixture, I think, of practicality and beauty is something that is core to our values and core to our identity as Vermonters.
All right, well, we'll have to leave it there for today, but again, thank you, Susan Evans McClure, for being with us today to bring us up to speed on what's going on at the Vermont Arts Council. Really interesting stuff. And well, next time you're down this way in Bennington County, we can maybe do this conversation in person next time.
That's great. And I encourage everyone to go out this summer. We're heading into summer festival and concert season. There's just so much performance and arts experiences out in the community, especially in Bennington County in the summer. So I hope to see everyone out at performances and events this summer. And thanks so much for having me.
Well, thank you. Thank you for making the time for the conversation. And thank you to all our folks who have been with us today. I hope you found the program interesting. And well, we'll see you again the next time. Meanwhile, take care. Thank you very much for sharing part of your day with us.